Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Who's Who in Academic Emergency Medicine, a product of the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine. I'm Cole Ettingoff, a medical student and a member of several SAEM committees. Every other month throughout the year, we will hear from a leader in academic EM from across the country, learning a bit more about their career and looking for any advice they may have for our own journeys. So today I'm excited to have with me Dr. Youyou Duanmu.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Honored to be here.
Thanks for coming. Dr. Duanmu is a clinical assistant professor, faculty director of the EM Clinical Research Unit, and co-director of the Ultrasound Fellowship in the Stanford Emergency Department. Dr. Duanmu completed medical school at the Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons, EM residency at Mount Sinai Beth Israel, and a 2-year ultrasound fellowship at Brigham and Women's Hospital, while earning a Master's of Public Health at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and Quantitative Research Methods. Her areas of research focus are in critical care, point-of-care ultrasound, ultrasound education, and competency assessment, and clinical trials. Dr. Duanmu is currently leading the industry-funded research initiatives for the Stanford Emergency Department as well. Within SAEM, she's been an active member of the research committee since 2021, where I've had the chance to work with her several times, and is currently serving as the research officer of the Academy of Emergency Ultrasound. Quite the bio there, and we're excited to have you with us today. You've obviously had quite the career in EM research, but why don't we start from the beginning? What got you interested in EM research initially?
Yeah, so it's going to be pretty nerdy sounding, I think, but I was interested in research initially because I actually like statistics, maybe not like the nitty-gritty of logistic regression and the math behind it, but just the concept of statistics in general. I feel like even starting in high school, I just felt like with how much data we're bombarded with now, and then going through medical school, like how much information we have to sift through as physicians, I like statistics as a way of directing critical thinking, figuring out what information that you should be paying attention to, what extent, kind of understanding causation, correlation, those kinds of things. I think it really helped as a physician scientist. So that's sort of what got me interested in research initially, and then getting more involved in ultrasound and emergency medicine has sort of helped me hone, where I wanted to focus that. But I think an interest in at least statistical methods was kind of a doorway into all of that.
I can't relate to that at all, but I am grateful that we've got folks who do love statistics. Had you gotten started with that kind of interest before med school, in med school? Where along the way did you discover that statistics and that research was an interest?
Yeah, I would say statistics, at least in some small extent in even undergrad, high school, just kind of like feeling that the concepts were familiar, like incidence, prevalence, sensitivity, specificity, that kind of thing. And then I didn't really get involved significantly in research until residency, I would say. I did a little bit in undergrad, more like bench research, a lot of the stuff that students will do when they're just trying to figure out if they like basic sciences versus medicine. Did a little bit of neuroscience research. But then in residency, found some really good mentors. My program director, Dr. Sadia Akhtar, and then also Dr. Michael Heller, they really helped me kind of hone in on my research interests, because I already knew I was interested in ultrasound and that I might want to pursue an ultrasound fellowship. And I think that just getting more into that world of going into fellowship, going into academic medicine, research often is one of those things that's just like part of the package deal. And then they really helped me see that's also something that I would want to pursue as part of my career, not just a checkbox, when you're going to apply or be part of a fellowship. So I still remember one of the first projects that I really took on my own was taking like 20 chicken drumsticks, and then I broke half of them, pinned them to a poster board, and then asked my co-residents to scan them to see if they could tell which ones were broken and which ones weren't, to mimic like hand bones or something. And then the chicken drumsticks slowly getting slimier and slimier over the course of the morning. But it was just a lot of fun, and just figuring out, like the methodology behind how am I going to collect the data, like what's going to be the outcome. And so that was my first taste of research when it comes to EM and ultrasound.
Very cool. I'm glad your residency was so supportive of that you found the chance to not only find your passion, but get some good mentorship along the way. You mentioned that you had done an ultrasound fellowship. I know something that we hear a lot of residents talk about is, should we do a fellowship? Should it be in, a quote research fellowship or something more specific like ultrasound. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about your thought process behind why you decided to pursue the fellowship and why in ultrasound.
Yeah. So pretty early on, even in medical school, I knew that I liked ultrasound. It was actually one of the ways that I sort of first found emergency medicine. I just thought ultrasound was such a cool tool. A lot of people talk about it like a superpower, but I really just liked that immediate, honing in about a sick patient, trying to figure out what's going on with them. You have a list of like 10 things, and with your ultrasound, you can narrow it down to, maybe one or two. And then also the procedural guidance behind it. It's something that I first got interested in from a clinical point of view. But I think that I was really lucky because the fellowship that I chose was a very academically focused fellowship. And so it was a 2-year fellowship, which involved, getting a lot of training in ultrasound, but then also getting to choose your own adventure in terms of picking a master's degree and also just a further focus within ultrasound. And so I knew that for my kind of area of further expertise, I wanted to do research. And so getting that additional training in public health and in research methods specifically within the MPH, I think really helped expand my career. So I do think that if you want to be focused in research, at least a good percentage of your effort from a clinical and academic sort of distribution, it does help a lot to do fellowship, mostly because you can take your time to expand your research portfolio, figure out what you're interested in, and then also potentially get additional training, whether it is a master's or seeking some of these courses like what SAEM offers with ARMED, for example. But there's a lot of other certifications out there that can help people feel really confident in their methodology and being self-sufficient.
I love that phrase you used to describe your fellowship, that concept of a choose your own adventure and being able to sort of customize where your focus was. It sounds like a really cool opportunity. I imagine once you got out of fellowship, you may have felt a little bit less of that. What was your transition like coming out of fellowship and sort of into the workforce, so to speak?
Yeah. So I do feel like taking 2 years to do fellowship helped me a lot with figuring out what I want to do as a next step, which was nice because a lot of times with fellowship, you go into the first year and then 2 or 3 months in, you're applying for jobs already. So I was able to take a little bit more time and figure out where I wanted to go next. And then I think because I was able to take a little more time during fellowship, I also was able to accomplish a little bit more in terms of like having a couple research projects under my belt and, doing a degree and things like that. And so that really helped me, I think, find the right job fit for me. So I came here to Stanford right after fellowship about 6 years ago and basically was part of our ultrasound section, but then also had expressed my interest in being an ultrasound researcher. So that was helpful to kind of set that stage early. I think when people are looking for their first job out of training, it's nice to kind of let the department know where your focus is going to be. I mean, that can always change as you get established, but it's nice to declare that early so that you can get the support that you need, whether it's in terms of mentorship or time, so that you can get yourself on the right track. Because it's a lot harder just to come in as faculty somewhere, not be part of a section or division, or not be kind of established as, I'm going to be focusing my academic time on this, and then trying to carve out, your protected time or carve out your niche after you've already started working, 14, 16 shifts a month or something.
Yeah, you were able to sort of lay down roots there. I understand your role at Stanford has got a lot of pieces to it. You're still working clinically at least sometime. You're doing your own research, and then you've got some sort of leadership, more administrative type roles there. How do you find the balance amongst all of those?
Yeah, and that's a great question because I think that is something that I definitely expanded on after coming here. Initially, I knew I wanted to do ultrasound. I knew I wanted to do some research, but then I was able to kind of explore some more avenues that, and I think that's one thing about academics that's so nice is that you can keep trying to customize what you want your work life to look like. Just having that combination of clinical work, teaching, research administration, that's one of those things that people can keep shifting back and forth as they go along in their career to figure out what fulfills them. And having a good balance of that, I feel like just makes it so that you're not going to get burned out. You're not doing too much of any one thing. So for me personally, within ultrasound, a couple of years in, I realized that I really liked the fellowship education side of things. And so taking on the role of the co-fellowship director with Kenton Anderson at my shop, that was a natural transition just to get more involved in that specific type of both education and mentorship. So I feel like teaching fellows is so rewarding. These are people who decided to take extra time to do additional training. Nobody made them do it. They're very motivated. They're already on their way to do really cool things. And so just helping people find their passion and find their path is super rewarding to me. And then the new role that I've gotten involved in recently, that's actually as of a couple months ago. So I'll have to tell you how that goes, maybe after I've been in it for longer. But that one also is really interesting to me because within our department, we have a lot of different kinds of research. And this clinical research unit is mostly focused on industry sponsored research, which I feel like is an area that EM hasn't been super established in traditionally. And we kind of have a special focus within that because there was a lot of innovations minded people in our department who do this program called STEP, where they talk to a lot of companies that are more like startups and tech focused companies and trying to figure out if there's a research partnership to be had there. So that's a role that I'm really excited to be taken on because I think that's going to be a ton of potential for innovations minded research and also to get other faculty who might not be super familiar with funded research to get them plugged into these investigator and PI roles.
It's an important trend. If you find any big pockets of industry funding, feel free to share them around. I'm sure we'll all jump on them.
Yeah, yeah, I'll let you know.
So let's shift a little bit from your journey into getting to where you are now into some of your research focus related to ultrasounds. Can be a big bucket. There's a lot of stuff going on in this field right now. Do you have a specific focus within ultrasound or an area that you find most interesting?
Yeah, I think that's also kind of shifted as I've come along. And that's one thing about research is I think that it's really nice to look at opportunities that come your way and then filter through them and figure out which ones you want to take on for more the long term. I think that one of my main interests in ultrasound is basically ultrasound for resuscitation or critical care. Like my fellowship project was making a decision rule for pericardial effusion. I feel like we can always use more decision rules and prediction scores. And so that's one of those disease processes that I found that there was a lot of disagreement even between emergency medicine, cardiology, about who actually has tamponade. And so that kind of led me to working with some of our internal medicine and critical care colleagues during COVID to do some work on lung ultrasound and COVID because, at that time it was really hard to figure out safe diagnostics, quick diagnostics for people trying to triage who's going to be sick or who's going to be not sick. And so that was something that I was really interested in. And then another thing that I found a lot of passion for was ultrasound in education. I think ultrasound in itself is actually a very natural education tool. We've kind of introduced it to medical training first year of medical school because it's a really good way of focusing what you're learning anatomy wise and pathophysiology with seeing something in real time. And so we kind of carry that throughout residency training, fellowship, and even our attendings who maybe graduated before ultrasound training was required, or people who come back to do a little bit of faculty development, doing research on how to the best methodology behind teaching people in a way that they're going to actually be able to carry forward and retain and become competent in being able to practice that independently has been another focus area of mine.
Wonderful. So a couple of things on there I want to follow up on. First is this concept that ultrasound is both a clinical tool and an educational tool. One of the things that we've heard from some of our other ultrasound leaders is that we do have older faculty or older attendings who this isn't the technology they grew up with. It's something new, many of whom are learning it quickly and really embracing it. We're also seeing a generation come up for whom this is a little more natural. This is the kind of technology they may have gotten their hands on earlier. Have you seen progress in terms of that education of students coming in more capable, more readily understanding how ultrasound is put to use?
Yeah, definitely. And it's really exciting now seeing all the new generations of medical students and residents coming through. I think that, maybe 5, 10 years ago, there was only a handful of medical schools that had really integrated ultrasound into their medical student curriculum. And now that's, I'd say, more common than not that folks coming into, especially emergency medicine residency, have already, had their hands on a probe multiple times during their medical school careers. So I think it's one of those things where, in emergency medicine, we've had ultrasound as a core competency for a while now, but we're able to get people further than we ever were before because a couple of years ago, we kind of started from scratch with teaching an intern how to do a fast exam and how to hold a probe and do an echo. But a lot of people coming in with a lot of that knowledge already, we can get them by the end of residency into doing even more advanced modalities like, nerve blocks and advanced echo. And so that's been really cool to see, people starting from an accelerated place and being able to take ultrasound even further during their training.
Yeah. You mentioned some of those classic ultrasound scenarios, things like the fast exam, the echo, as well as some more advanced complex things. I'd be curious where you saw, where you saw ultrasound going in emergency medicine over the next 10, 20 years, or even a little longer. What does ultrasound look like for the next generation of ER docs?
Yeah. Well, one good thing about ultrasound, I think, is because it was, introduced only in the past couple decades as this emerging technology. It's also been an area where technology has had a lot of room to grow. And so we've seen, the advent of these handhelds that you can take anywhere and do a lot of this global health and this outreach, including like tele ultrasound. I think that'll be a big one where you can kind of be providing this tool and being able to deploy it in places where people might not have access to a lot of other imaging, or being able to deploy that expert resource, because not everywhere is going to have people that are ultrasound fellowship trained. But if you can get the probe to people and find a way to connect to them, I think that you'll be able to actually pass along that expertise on a larger scale to places that maybe right now don't have a ton of ultrasound boots on the ground. I think another area that's going to be big is kind of buzzword for everybody, but in AI, a lot of the industry or the vendors that we're working with right now are rolling out these different AI features for ultrasound. And I think that's definitely going to be a bigger part of both clinical and ultrasound education. For example, point of care ultrasound, you put your probe, get a nice apical 4, and it'll just tell you what the EF is. As long as you can get a good enough image, you can kind of get that guidance, or it'll tell you, you're holding your probe in this way. If you adjust it in that way, you're going to get an even better picture. So I think there's a lot of that coming down the line, and a lot of room to research that as well. And then finally, I think ultrasound and critical care just goes so much hand in hand that continuing to expand on that is going to be a huge field. We've heard a lot about TEE the past maybe 5-10 years as well. And I think that's just going to keep growing, just seeing that in real time, being able to tell someone, like, if you moved your hand this far along the chest while you're doing chest compressions, you're actually going to get good cardiac output versus we can tell right now you're hitting like the aortic valve. I think that's going to be huge as we keep rolling that out more and more.
Very cool. You mentioned critical care a couple of times. And it sounds like particularly during the pandemic, you were doing a lot of work with other areas of medicine, cardiology, critical care, perhaps some pulmonology. Curious, COVID certainly catalyzed a lot of working relationships there. But we've also heard stories of emergency medicine physicians who were almost looked down upon by other departments of medicine or felt like there was a barrier there. Do you feel like your colleagues in other specialties were receptive to working with you, viewed emergency medicine as something that had good research at the table?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think emergency medicine definitely has, very close relationships to a lot of departments. And there's some things that I think we're very respected for, and some things that other departments feel like they've had a little bit of a lead on us. So I think that ultrasound specifically is a nice way to collaborate with other departments. And we've done collaborations with internal medicine as well as trauma at our institution when we did a serratus anterior plane block study. I think when it comes to ultrasound, we're really the established leaders for point of care ultrasound within a lot of specialties, and they're trying to get into that space more and more. And so that's kind of a nice place to collaborate with others, because you're kind of working on either the same ground or potentially kind of teaching them a thing or two about point of care ultrasound. And it's something that we feel like we can really take a leadership role in within the hospital, within other departments. I've had good luck, I think, with the collaborators I've worked with from a research standpoint too, but I do feel like in terms of research, there are areas where emergency medicine is still catching up with other specialties when it comes to, for example, federally funded research or these large, multi-institution studies that other specialties like oncology or cardiology have been doing for many years, and they're used to these large networks and large amounts of sample size and funding.
I think that transitions beautifully into sort of us zooming back out and thinking a little bit more about sort of the nationwide sort of collaborative nature of EM research and how we move that forward. You described it as a sort of catching up to some other specialties. You're right. We're very young specialty in a lot of ways. We don't have the kind of complexity and depth and breadth of research that some other specialties experience. You mentioned specifically some things like funding and collaboration across networks. I'm curious what else you think we as a specialty need to be doing to move research forward.
Yeah, I think that, as a young specialty, we do have a lot of momentum. We have a ton of talented people who are really interested in research. I think it's really about directing those energies. I think SAEM is a great place, and that's me personally. I found a lot of support there because you can get together with a lot of established researchers, within the research committee or some of our other interest groups and committees, people who have already laid the groundwork or have gone through the same processes and finding that type of mentorship. I think sometimes with EM and research specifically, it's nice to have a wider breadth of mentorship and collaboration across the country because it is a relatively smaller field. And if you get into a specific niche area like ultrasound or, wilderness or tox, the group is even smaller. And so being able to find people from all over to be able to get their knowledge and expertise is really helpful. And I think it really is helping us grow and get that larger stake in research and especially in funded research. Because I think, with research, a lot of times we don't really like to think about the money behind it. But I think in any type of, you know, medicine and any type of work, really, you have to think about how you're going to support yourself and what you want to do. And so I think that is actually a big part of research that emergency medicine is getting more and more established in. And foundations like SAEM or ASAP are helping us by getting people familiar with applying for foundation level grants. And then the next step will be getting like an EMF grant or getting NIH, DOD, like CDC funding. I think that is a really nice trend that we're seeing.
Very cool. You hit on a couple of these sort of subspecialties within emergency medicine, ultrasound, wilderness toxicology. EMS is another one that we hear a lot of
Mm-hmm.
in terms of emergency medicine, sort of developing and really identifying the areas where these are our turf, so to speak, where there isn't necessarily as much collaboration outside the specialty. EM has always been known as one of those specialties that's sort of a jack of all trades, where there really is a broad scope of what we do. Do you see us getting more specialized over time?
I feel like in academic medicine specifically, there definitely is a trend to that. I think that in some of these larger institutions, and it might be my own perspective too, with the track that I've chosen coming through a lot of these university organizations, is that the more specialized people get, the more that they can kind of carve out their own area of expertise and really pursue that, whether it comes from a research standpoint or education. Because a lot of these subspecialties have their own fellowships. I think that, in other settings where people might be working clinically or having a more generalized view of things, and there's not also every consultant in the world that exists at their hospital or every fellowship that EM contains, there may not be the need to really feel like you have to focus down. But I think academic careers have definitely looked for people to build some kind of area that they can say, I have specialty training in this in order to kind of bring that little extra something to a department. Because I think as an academic, chair or vice chair of the hiring process, they really want a diverse group of faculty and people that can really take their area of expertise and also spread that to the other faculty and trainees at their institution. So having that little extra something, even if it's something that other people are involved in within the department, you can also say like, oh, I do like ultrasound plus education, for example, really helps you stand out.
Very cool. Sort of a jack of all trades with some areas of a little more expertise.
Yeah.
You've certainly worked with some fellows at Stanford. I know you've done some collaboration and some mentorship for residents as well as some junior faculty. What kind of advice do you have for folks who are really early on in their career trying to figure out how to make research a bigger part of their career?
Yeah, I think that, starting from even residency, it's nice to just get involved in different types of research opportunities. But at some point, you don't want to say yes to everything because you only have a limited amount of time. But I think it is okay to explore different avenues of research, even if you're not 100% sure that's what you want to do long term, just because it'll teach you something. And sometimes you'll be surprised that something that you might have gotten involved in just because it was available to you will become an area of interest. For example, I got involved in some research when it came to clinical trials for hyperkalemia in my department, which isn't an area that I was previously interested in, but it gave me a ton of experience with how a clinical trial is run, how budgets are run, like how you do a multi-center thing, working with people all over the country, how industry-funded research is done. And it really opened up doors for me to now take on this role of, leading up clinical research within our department. And so I think that when you're starting out, it's nice to cast a little bit of a wider net on the type of research projects that you might want to try. And even if you don't end up pursuing that specific thing long term, it'll teach you some lessons about what you do and don't like. And then also it'll connect you with people. I think that's the other thing, like collaborating with as many people as you can, especially people who you feel like you want to do what they do 10 or 20 years down the line. And then just using that type of collaboration to build mentorship and to kind of figure out what you would need to do to get to where you want to be academically.
Thinking back to your bio that we read as we were opening up our conversation, you've certainly been at some big name institutions, Harvard, Stanford, Columbia. We've certainly seen some powerhouses in emergency medicine research, Stanford certainly being one of them, at Michigan, Yale, these big name institutions. So someone who's trying to figure out what the next chapter in their journey is, do they need to be at one of those big name institutions, especially in an era where collaboration happens so much more often virtually and with remote sites? Is there still the same value of being at one of those big names?
Yeah. And I think that is definitely the case where it's not necessary to be at one of the big name institutions. Although personally as well, it's hard for me to say exactly what the counterfactual would be with my experience that I had, but I feel like a lot of the collaborators that I've worked with, whether it comes to clinical trials research or ultrasound, are coming from places all across the country. And so I think that's one of the things that's really nice to be able to leverage now is these larger national societies, because either joining these committees or virtually through SAEM or other national societies, like for example, through ultrasound, we have the SAEM and ASAP societies, as well as SCUF, which is the Society for Clinical Ultrasound Fellowships. You can virtually or in person at conferences meet people from all around the country, and I think get a lot of research collaboration done that way. And then there's also been programs set up so that people can also receive extra training or mentorship for people outside their institution through some of these societies. But I also feel like you don't have to be at a big name institution to get great training. There's so many universities who have amazing research training, and a lot of places where there's just such good established clinical emergency medicine and such a kind of rich patient population that if anything, there might actually be even larger potential to do research at some of these places, like county programs, for example, because they actually have the pathology and the numbers there. It's just about leveraging the resources to be able to kind of apply the methodology to their patient population. So I think that if you're interested in research, you can definitely find a way to get where you want to be. But I think that, trying to figure out exactly what you want your path to be, and then trying to explore some of these avenues where you can get hooked up with the right people. And I keep saying across the country, but honestly, there's actually people even internationally like that we work with. For example, with medical education, the Canadian emergency medicine folks are even quite a few steps ahead of us. So it's just about kind of getting hooked up with the right folks.
And for our last question today, I want to again sort of hit on that topic of trying to find that balance. We've talked a bit about the balance between, super specializing and being broad. Talked a little about that balance between clinical and research and how that can change around a little bit as you go through your career. All of these things together, the research, the clinical work, the administrative work, all has to be balanced out with some sort of life outside of the hospital. Have you been able to find that balance? Any tips for folks who are trying to find that balance?
Yeah, I think that's a question where, I definitely wouldn't call myself an expert. I feel like everybody is kind of working to get better and better at that as long as they're in this career. But I think that one of the things that I've found is that in terms of choosing to do things outside of the clinical space, you do have to pick something that you're really going to feel passionate about and fulfilled doing, because often when it comes to, for example, protected time, the amount of time that you take off from clinical work to devote to something else is not going to be one to one. If you take an 8-hour shift off of your schedule for the month, it's probably going to equate to doing more than 8 hours of research or education or whatever it is, just because that's kind of the natural conversion of that type of effort. And so I think that choosing to do things outside of clinical work, you really have to make sure it's something that you really believe in and that it doesn't necessarily feel like work or that it's going to really weigh you down. The other thing that I've found is, especially with research, it's nice to get a sense of how much effort different projects are going to take at different times of the project. So there's often a lot of time that you need to invest in the startup phase. And if you also schedule yourself for a ton of clinical shifts or you teach a course at the same time, you're trying to get a research project off the ground in terms of consents and IRB and, all that kind of like budget negotiations, it's going to make it really hard for you. And so trying to figure out how to intersperse the different things that you want to focus on in order to at least leave a couple hours at the end of each day, I think is a big part of trying to strategize the time.
Certainly no small task, and it maybe like most of things in life, we're still trying to find that balance as we go. But thank you
Yeah,
so much to Dr. Duanmu for joining us today. I know one of the big takeaways that I got out of this is just how many opportunities there are to collaborate nationally within groups like SAEM, things like our academies, committees, and interest groups. So we certainly encourage all listeners to join in on those. We look forward to seeing you not only at those meetings, but also at the annual meeting this year. Thank you again to Dr. Duanmu and to SAEM for having us.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure.